Welcome to the introduction of our course, Basic Arabic Reading. There are a number of challenges for reading Arabic. Take for example this word in Arabic. For someone who hasn't seen Arabic before, there are a number of issues here. One of them is that Arabic is written from right to left, unlike most other scripts. The other issue is that the letters are connected to each other. They're like cursive, so it's difficult to tell them apart. The third challenge is that letters take different shapes depending on their position, if they're in the beginning of the word or in the middle or the end of the word. Another important challenge is the diacritics or harakat, which are short vowels which guide the pronunciation of letters. What we will learn in this course will be to know the name of each letter, allowing us to spell out any word in Arabic, and to know the shapes of each letter, and to know the sound of each letter, and to know the diacritics and how it interacts with the sound of the letter. So let's take an example here. This is an Arabic word that we don't know, so we will start analyzing it letter by letter. The first letter is kaf with fatha diacritic, which sounds as ka, and the second is lam with kasra diacritic, which makes it sounds as li, and the third is mim with fatha, which sounds as ma, and the final is ta marbuta, which sounds as h. So putting it all together, it would be like ka li ma h, kalima, which means word in Arabic. And using this approach, knowing the names, shapes, sounds of the letters, and in addition to the diacritics, we'll be most accurately able to sound out any word in Arabic. So the next steps is to actually learn the Arabic alphabet letters and learn the diacritics, and this is the content of the course. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first lesson of this course. In this lesson, we will be talking about the Arabic alphabet. The Arabic alphabet has 28 letters, and we're going to talk about their names and their sounds today. One important thing to notice about Arabic letters and Arabic sounds in general is that not all the sounds exist in English, and therefore the transcription system for writing these letters and their names and their sounds in English can be problematic, and there can be more than one system for transcribing them in English. For example, let's take this letter called B. You'll notice that the last sound of this letter, B, it's called glottal stop. It does not exist in English, therefore some transcription system put it as an apostrophe, like here, while others would use some form of number, like number 2 here, to indicate that there is a glottal stop at the end of this word. And this system, we call it Franco-Arab. And this is the basis of the transcription system that we will be using in this course. So let's go through the letters one by one, and we'll see these issues about the transcription as we talk about each letter. The first letter is called alif. Alif, which can be equivalent to the sound A or O or E in English, and we'll talk about it when we come to it. The second letter is called Ba, Ba, which is roughly equivalent to the letter B in English. The third letter is called T, T, which is roughly equivalent to the letter T in English. Then we have the letter Th, Th, which is similar to the sound at the beginning of the word 3 in English. And then we have the letter Jim, Jim, and it is roughly equivalent to the letter J or the sound J in English, as in George, but some dialects like Egyptian dialect call it gim and use it as g in English, as in the word girl. Then we have this letter called ha. Ha. It's similar to the letter H in English, but the pronunciation is different. In phonology you call it voiced, and for this reason we can use it either as an H and there's a dot under it, and as in this transcription system, or in the Franco-Arab we use the number 7 because it's similar to the shape of this sound to indicate the sound ha, ha. So this is ha, ha. And then we have the sound of the letter kha, kha, which does not exist in English, but it exists in other languages such as German and Spanish. For example, in German the word Buch or Bach. Then we have the letter Del, which is similar to the D sound in English. Del, Del. And we have then the letter Vel, Vel, which is similar to the sound the, as in the word the or this or those. Vel, Vel. And then we have the letter Ra, Ra, which is roughly equivalent to the sound R in English. Ra, Ra. And then we have the letter Zay, Zay, which is similar to the letter Z in English, or Z. And then we have the letter Sin, Sin, which is similar to the S sound in English. And then we have Sheen, Sheen, which has the sound sh, as in the word should or shall. And then we have the letter Sod, Sod, which also has the sound S, S, yet in a more emphatic way. So it is not S, but it's more of S, S. So it's Sod. So some transcription systems would put a dot under the S or use other diacritics for this, but in our transcription system we add another S, so it's Sod, Sod. And then we have the letter Dod, Dod, which is also an emphatic form of Del, Del. But in order to show this emphatic sound, we put a dot in this transcription system under the D, or we add another D to give this emphasis. So it's Dod, Dod. And we also have the letter Ta, which has an emphatic sound, Ta, Ta, which is similar to Te, but with more emphasis. So some transcription systems would add a dot under the T, and in the transcription system we're using, we just add another T, so that would be Ta, Ta. And there is also the letter Dha, Dha, which is similar to both Vel, Vel, and Zay, Zay, but with more emphasis. So sometimes it is written as Z and there's a dot under it. So we call it Dha, Dha. And there is this letter which does not exist in English. The sound of it does not exist in English, only exists in very few languages. It's called Ain, Ain. And sometimes in transcribing it, it's also written as some form of an apostrophe, but this can be very confusing because apostrophe can also be used for the glottal stop. So in our transcription system we are using the Franco-Arab notation of using the 3, the letter 3, because it is similar to how this letter is written. So this is called Ain, Ain. And then we have the letter Ghain, Ghain, which corresponds to a sound that does not exist in English, but it exists in other languages, such as in French and German, when speakers are trying to pronounce the R sound. Like in French when people say parler, or in German when people say Krieg. So it is rein, rein. And then we have the letter fe, fe, which roughly corresponds to the F letter in English. And then we have the letter qaf, qaf, which is one of those emphatic sounds that corresponds to the K sound but with more emphasis. So we call it qaf, qaf. And then we have the letter kaf, kaf, which corresponds to the K sound in English. And then we have lam, which corresponds roughly to the L sound in English, lam, lam. And then mim, which corresponds to the M sound in English, meme, meme. And then noon, corresponding to the N sound in English, noon, noon. And then he, corresponding to the H or H sound in English, he, he. Notice that it's similar to ha, but since there is difference in pronunciation, these two are different letters, and in the transcription system we are indicating this by using 7 for ha and simple H for he. And then there is the letter waw, which is simply corresponding to the sound W or wu, wow, wow. And finally we have ye, ye. And then finally we have ye, ye, which roughly corresponds to Y or E sound. Ye, ye. Okay, so we have covered all of the letters of the Arabic alphabet. Of course, there will be some extensions of it and some other variations, but these will be covered when we talk about each of these letters individually in the coming lessons. Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome to our lecture today. In this lecture, we'll be talking about 3 new letters: the letter mim, the letter noon, and the letter ha. The letter mim corresponds to the sound m, like the letter M in English, and it takes a number of different forms. This is how it looks like when it is separate, and this is the initial form, this is the medial form, and this is the final form. Notice that in the medial form here might be similar to medial forms of letters that we have seen before. Which one is it? Yes, it is Ain. So I encourage you to look into Ain and into Mim, into the medial form, and see the difference between them. Let's take a word like makan, makan, which means place in Arabic. You'll find that the letter Mim comes in the beginning of this word, so it takes the initial form. While for a word like laymoon, laymoon, or lemon, you'll find that the letter Mim comes in the middle, so it takes the medial form. And then you'll find the word like alam, alam, or pain, and you'll find that the letter Mim comes at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Moving on to the letter noon, noon, which corresponds to the n sound for the letter N in English, and you'll find that it also has a number of different forms. This is how it looks like when it is separate, and this is how it looks like when it's in the beginning of the word. So this is the initial form, and this is the medial form, and this is the final form. And we see that in the word like nahnu, nahnu, which means we, we'll find that the letter noon comes in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. While for the word like mabna, mabna, which means building, you'll find the letter noon comes in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. While for the word like laban, which means milk, you'll find that the letter noon comes at the end of the word and it takes the final form. Notice that in the word nahnu, you'll find that there is another noon at the end of the word which takes also the final form. Moving on to the letter he, and here we need to make a little distinction because we've seen before the letter ha, which sounds similar to some extent, yet there is some important phonological differences between them. And so this is he, which corresponds to the sound as in the letter H in English. We can see that this letter has different forms, so this is the form when it is separate, and this is the form when it is the beginning of the word, so this is the initial form, this is the medial form, and this is the final form. So this is, for example, for the word huna, which means here, you'll find that the letter he comes in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. And here we see that for the word sahl, which means easy, you'll find that the letter he comes in the middle, so it takes the medial form. While for the word like wajh, which means face, you'll find that it comes at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Here's something that we need to notice. The letter he, especially in the separate form and in the final form, you'll find it similar to something that we have seen in one of the earlier letters. Can you remember what it is? Yes, it's ta marbuta. But the difference is that ta marbuta has two dots on top of this shape, whether in the separate or in the final form, and they have different ways of pronouncing them. But this he is just he, like the he sound. So in this lecture we have seen three new letters: the letter mim, the letter noon, and the letter he. We have seen their different shapes, we know their sounds and their names. So let's do the quizzes and learn how to recognize them in any word in Arabic in our journey to master the Arabic alphabet. Thank you so much. Welcome to the last lecture of the alphabet section. In this lecture, we will talk about three letters: the letter waw, and the letter ya, and what is known as hamza, which is not usually regarded as one of the letters, but it's very important because it occurs in so many words in so many different ways. So we'll talk about all of these today. The letter waw represents the wu sound, which is either the W sound that we can see in water, or like the long O, like in moon. And in terms of shape, it has only two shapes: when it is in the beginning or separate, or when it is in the medial form or in the final form and connected to a letter before it. So for example, for in the word like walad, which means boy, you'll find that it is taking the initial form, while for the word like afu, which means forgiveness, you'll find that it takes the final or the medial form because it is connected to the letter before it, which is fa. Moving on to the letter ya, which is the last letter of the Arabic alphabet, you'll find that it sounds similar to the sound of the letter Y in English, like yellow, and it sounds also like similar to the sounds of a long E, like the word eat or lead or something like this. And in terms of shape, you'll find that it takes different shapes. So this is how it looks like when it is separate, and this is the initial form, this is the medial form, and this is the final form. So for a word like yawm, which means day, you'll find that the letter ya comes in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. While for a word like jayyid, the letter ya comes in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. while for a word like naqi, naqi, the letter ya comes at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Notice that this final form and the separate form might be similar to something that we have seen before in an earlier lesson. What is it? Yes, it's alif layyina. Alif layyina looks exactly the same as ya in the final form and in the separate form. The difference is that ya typically has two dots under it to indicate that it has the yi sound. Moving on to something that is very important in Arabic, which we know as Hamza. Hamza is not typically considered as one of the letters of the alphabet, but it is very important because it can exist either separately or combined with other letters, and it gives the sound of what we know as glottal stop. Glottal stop is not something that you can find in a straightforward way in English and other languages, but to approximate it, you'll find it in a word or an expression like uh-oh, where you find this sound is a glottal stop. So the Hamza indicates that there is a glottal stop whenever we see it. For example, when this character or this letter exists separately, for a word like qira'ah, you will see this glottal stop at this part, qira'ah. So this is the Hamza sound here. Or you can find it at the end, something like sahra, which means desert, and you find it sahra, and this is the glottal stop at the end. You find it combined with other letters, for example in a word like fa'r, which means mouse, and here you find the glottal stop in the middle, fa'r. And you can also find it in a word like bu's, which means misery, so you'll find the glottal stop at the waw in the middle here. Or you can find it combined with ya, which what is known as hamza ala nabra, and you find a word like shay. So these are different combinations of having hamza with other letters. For the hamza ala nabra, you can find it in different forms. You can see it in the middle form, like a word like fi'ran, which means mice, and you find that the glottal stop is in the middle with hamza ala nabra. And you find it also in a word like sayyi, which means bad, and you find also the hamza ala nabra is at the end of the word. You can theoretically find it separately, but I couldn't find any word where the hamza ala nabra occurs separately. So these are the letters that we've covered today: the letter waw, the letter ya, and the letter hamza, and all of these are very important in your learning journey of Arabic. And with these you have concluded covering all of the letters of the Arabic alphabet, which is a great achievement. Now we need to do the quizzes and do the section practice, which will test all your knowledge of all the letters of the Arabic alphabet, and then we will move on to the next section. Thank you. Welcome to this lesson about the first letter of the alphabet, the letter Alif. One of the major difficulties of Arabic that we want to address in this course is that many letters have different shapes, and this is particularly important for the letter Alif because we can see it has so many different shapes. All of these have Alif in some form. So let's try to go and break it down a little bit to see how can we understand these forms. One of the major sources of variation of the shape of the letter Alif is what is known as Hamza, which is a small character that can be placed above the letter, like here, or it can be placed below the letter, as in here, and it can be combined with other diacritics, as in here. So let's see how it contributes. And also we can see that other characters such as madda also can be above the letter. So let's see the contribution of each of these variations. So one of the sources of variation of the shape of letter alif is this small character, which is known as hamza. It is more like a hook that can be placed in different parts. It can be placed above the alif, like here, and it can be placed below it, and it can be combined with other diacritics, as in here. And there is also another variation of it called madda, which can also be above the alif. So let's see the contribution of each of these. When hamza is on top of the alif, it is by default pronounced as a, with a little bit of a glottal stop. So for the word meaning I or me or myself, it is ana, which starts with an alif with a hamza. Without hamza, there is not so much of a glottal stop, and it can sound as a or e, or depending on the word itself. So here for the word ibn, meaning son, ibn, it starts with an alif without hamza. In addition, alif can have hamza below it, and this one by default comes with a diacritic called kasra, which gives it more of an e sound. So when you have it in a word like ila, which means to or towards, you'll find that it starts with alif with hamza under it. You can also combine other diacritics to give different sound when you have alif with hamza. So when you have what is known as dhamma, which is this character here, you'll find that it gives the o sound. So for a word like this one, ustad, meaning teacher, you'll find that it starts with alif, with hamza, and also with dhamma. So this is very important to know. Another variation of the characters that can be placed above the alif is with what is known as madda, which is more of an extended form of alif. So it sounds as a. And here we have an example of the word ala, which means machine. So these are the forms of alif when combined with other characters, namely hamza, madda, and diacritics. There is also variation of the form of alif depending on where it is in the word. If it is in the beginning of the word, or it is separate and no other letter is connected to it, then it is written as such. If there is a letter that is connected to it before it, then it is written this way. We can see it here in the example of imra'a. Here the word imra'a means woman. It starts with the letter alif, but in this case without hamza, and it is written in this form as you see it above, imra'a. And in the other case where there is a letter before the alif and is connected to it, you'll find that it is taking different shape as we see here. So for the word nas, meaning people, you'll find that the alif in the middle takes a different shape from the alif that we see in the beginning of imra'a. And also this pattern of variation applies to all shapes that we've discussed in the previous slide, which occur with the combination of hamza or with madda or other things. So it applies the same way. So for example, the word arnab means rabbit, starts with alif in a separate form as we see above, while the word far has the letter alif in the middle form, and it is different from the one in the beginning form, and this is an important variation. We can also notice some kind of a sound variation here, because nas sounds different from far, and the difference here is caused by the presence of hamza, which gives this glottal stop that we talked about. Nas far, nas far. So we have seen now the variation depending on whether the letter is in the beginning of the word or in the middle or the end of the word and connected to previous letters. Another variation is for a certain combination for alif, when it is preceded by lam, when it's preceded by the letter lam, it forms this shape that is called lam alif. Lam alif. Lam alif here is two letters, but it is written as one shape, one ligature here, and it can also take different shape if it is in the beginning of the word or it's in the middle of the word and connected to letters before it. So for example here, when it starts the word, like for the word lama or the animal lama, you'll find that it takes this shape. However, if it's in the middle of the word, as in the word kalam, which means speech or words, you'll find that it takes this different shape. And this pattern also applies when you are adding the hamza or madda or any combination that we talked about earlier. One final form which is not very usual to associate with alif, it's actually called alif layyina. Alif layyina. And it is a letter which has the same letter as alif, but it only occurs at the end of the word. So here, for example, the word mustashfa, it means hospital, and you'll find that it ends with this letter, which when we see the other letters, you may find it similar to the letter ya, but it does not have dots under it. So in this case, it is read as alif, mustashfa. And similarly, it also the same for the word musiqa, which means music, which also ends with the a sound, and we see also it ends with the alif layyina letter. So these are the forms of alif that we can encounter in Arabic letters. But now that we have seen all of them and we have seen all their forms and combinations, we will be able to recognize them in any word that we see. So it's very important to work on the quiz and make sure that we understand all of these forms and all of these shapes very clearly before we move on to other letters. Thank you so much. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's lecture. Today we will be talking about the letters ba, ta, and tha. And you'll notice that ta has one important variant, which is called ta marbuta. So we will talk about all of these together today. First, let's start with the letter ba. Ba. It gives the same sound as the letter B in English. so it's very straightforward to pronounce, and it looks like this shape when it's separate. It's more like a plate that has a dot under it, and you will notice that it has different shapes depending on where it is in the word. If it's in the beginning of the word, or we call it initial form, it looks like this. If it's in the middle of the word, or what we call as medial form, it looks like this. If it appears at the end of the word, or what we call the final form, it looks like this. You'll notice that all of these different forms agree on one thing: it always has the dot under it. So this dot is the main indicator that this letter is actually B, in addition of course to the shape of it, that we will be able to recognize whether it's in the beginning or in the middle or in the end of the word. So let's take an example here. Let's look at the word batta, which means duck in Arabic. We'll find that it starts with the letter ba, and it looks like this, the same as the initial form that we have shown here. And let's look at the word tabib, and we'll find that the ba exists in the middle of the word, and it looks like the same medial shape that we have shown here. And for the word sabab, which means reason, we'll find that the letter ba comes at the end of the word, so it takes this final form that we have seen here. In addition, you'll find both the word tabib and sabab have both the medial form of ba and the final form of it. So tabib, this is the medial form, this is the final form. Sabab, this is the medial form, this is the final form. And so, seeing all of these forms together, you should be able to recognize the letter ba whenever you see it in any part of the word. Here is an interesting variation of the letter ba, which is not very widely used, but it might be useful to know that sometimes for certain sounds that do not exist in Arabic, there is some kind of borrowing of letters from Persian, where you'll find, for example, the sound pe, like Pepsi. It does not come immediately in Arabic, so sometimes some people would use this variant, which is called pe instead of be, to indicate that the sound intended is actually the p sound. And this is used in words that come from foreign origins, such as Paris or Paris, where some people would put 3 dots under it to indicate that it has the p sound, or Europa, which also follows the same thing. Some people would put 3 dots to use the p to indicate that we are using the p sound. Moving on to the next letter, it is the letter te, which is similar to the sound of the letter T in English, and you can find it to be quite similar to be, except that it has these 2 dots on top of the letter instead of 1 dot under it as in be. And you'll find that these 2 dots occur whether the letter is separate, or whether it's in the beginning of the word, or in the middle of the word, or the end of the word. So let's take a few examples. If the letter ta comes in the beginning of the word, you'll find that it appears in this shape, which is the initial form, and if it is in the middle, it takes the medial form, and if it's in the end, you'll find that it follows the final form. Notice that you can also recognize some of the letters that we've discussed earlier. For example, this letter ba, which has the initial form here, and you can also recognize the alif that we've discussed in the first lesson, and also the alif layyina that we've also discussed in the first lesson in the word mata. Moving on, we will discuss now what we know as ta marbuta. Ta marbuta. Marbuta means tied, which means that this is the normal ta, and when it is tied, it looks like this. And actually, it has more than one shape. It can occur like this or like that, and both of them occur in the end of the word. However, the only difference between this shape and this shape is that if the preceding letter has a medial form, so it will be connected to the ta marbuta, so it will look like this, as we see, for example, in the word kalima, which means word. And in this case, you'll find that the preceding letter, which is mim, is connected to the ta marbuta, which makes it look like this. However, if the preceding letter in this word does not connect to the ta marbuta, then it will take this shape, which we will see in the word warda. And in this case, you'll find that the dal does not connect to the ta marbuta, so it looks like this. And this is important because the ta marbuta, it is very frequent in Arabic. You'll find it in so many words and so many names, and it comes always at the end of these words, but it's not usually mentioned as one of the letters of the alphabet, because it's understood that it is one variant of the letter ta, but it's important to know it so that we can actually recognize it when we're reading words. And now, when we know that it has these two different forms, we can identify it when we see it in any word. One important thing about it is the pronunciation, because it has two different pronunciations. Normally, if the word that ends with ta marbuta comes separately, or there is a pause after it, you'll find that it is pronounced as ha. That's why when we say kalima, you'll find that it ends with a h sound. However, when we add one word next to it, like kalimat al-haq, you'll find that the letter ta marbuta is actually pronounced as t, kalimat. But this will come later. What's important now is to be able to recognize the ta marbuta whenever you see it. The next letter is the letter th, which corresponds to the sound th in English, like in the word three. And the main characteristic of this letter is that it has 3 dots on top of it, and you'll find that this characteristic applies whether it's in the beginning of the word, or in the middle of the word, or the end of the word. So this characteristic will allow us to recognize whenever we see th in any part of the word. So let's take examples. When it's in the beginning of the word, for example, like in the word thu'ban, you'll find that it looks as in the initial form as in here. Or when it is in the middle of the word, like in the word kathir, you'll find it looks like in the medial form as in here. And if it comes at the end of the word, like in the word مثلث, you'll find that it looks like the final form as we see here. Notice that in the word مثلث, this letter also comes in the medial form and in the final form. So it's important to be able to recognize this letter in any form that we can see in any part of the word. Also, maybe this can be an opportunity to review a little bit, because here we will find in this word ثعبان, which means snake, you'll find it has the letter ألف, ثعبان, and we can find it here. And it also has the letter باء, which we can find it here. So in this lecture we have seen the different letters باء, تاء مربوطة, and ثاء, and we have seen their different shapes, and now we will be able to recognize them whenever we see them in any part of any word in Arabic. So please, we will need to look into the quizzes and solve them and make sure we understand them very well before we proceed to the next lecture. Thank you so much. Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture where we'll be discussing the letters Jim, Ha, and Kha. The letter Jim is one of the tricky letters because in most parts of the Arab world it's pronounced as J, as in the sound J in the word George in English. But in other parts, mainly in Egypt, you'll find it called Gim, like Gulf. But for modern standard Arabic we will use it as Jim. This is how we're going to talk about it in this lesson. So the letter is called Jim, and it looks like this when it is separate. So it has a dot, and the dot is below this kind of a beak shaped part, and this is the main indicator or main characteristic of the letter, because we see that when it is in the initial form you'll find that it has this same beak appearance with a dot under it, and also the same where it is word medial in the medial form, or it's in the final form, it also has the same appearance with a dot under the beak shape. So let's take examples here. For example, the word Jamil means beautiful. This is how the Jim appears, and this is the same as the word initial form. For the word Shajara, you'll find that it has the Jim letter and is in the medial form, and this word Shajara means tree. And then you have it in the final form in the word Thalj, which means ice or snow. So these are the different shapes of this letter: separate, initial, medial, and final. The next letter is the letter Ha. This is also one of the tricky letters to pronounce because it does not exist in English and most other languages in the world. It is similar to the sound H, but with a different kind of pronunciation. If you have some phonological background, you will know there is something called voiced sounds and unvoiced. So Ha is a voiced sound where you have some kind of vibration in the vocal folds. But this is not important here. What is important now is that this letter is not the same as H sound, though it is similar to it, and that it appears in this shape. And that's why, if you notice, that in our transcription system we use the number 7 to indicate the sound ha, ha, and this is how we're going to use it in this course. Moving on to the different shapes of the letter, we'll find this is how it looks like when it is separate. It also has this kind of a beak shape in it, and when it is separate it has this large arc which is added to the end of the beak shape. And you'll find that this beak shape is the same as in the different shapes of the letter when it is word initial, in the initial form, or in the medial form, or in the final form. All of these have these beak shape, but they don't have the dot as we have seen in the Jim letter. So it has, the main characteristic is that it has only the beak shape without any dots in it. So let's take examples. In the beginning of the word you'll find that, for example, the word hulm, hulm, which means dream. This is how the ha appears. And then you have the word bahr, bahr. So the ha is in the middle and it appears as in the medial form. And the final form for ha, we can see it in the word balah, balah, which means dates. So these examples show the different shapes of the letter ha in the different places of the word. Moving on to the letter kha, kha. This is also one of the sounds that do not exist in English. However, they exist in other languages such as German, where you have the word like buch, or in Spanish, where you have the name, for example, someone called Alejandro in European Spanish. And when it comes to the shape, it looks similar to the pattern that we observed in both Jim and Ha. All of these letters have the same beak shape here, and when it is separate it has this big arc. And the main characteristic of the letter Kha here is that it also has the dot on top of the beak shape. So let's see in the different forms. So in the initial form it looks like this, in the medial form it looks like this, and in the final form it looks like this. And you also notice that the final form is pretty similar to the separate form. For the initial form you find the word like khabir, khabir, which means an expert. Or in the medial form you'll find it in a word like sakhra, sakhra, which means rock or stone. And in the final form you'll find it in a word like tarikh, tarikh, which means history. So now we have seen the different shapes of the letter Kha. So in this lecture we have seen the letters Jim and Ha and Kha. We have seen their different forms and shapes, and we know their sounds. So this is important. Whenever we see any of these in any word, now we can recognize it. So please, let's do the quizzes and let's try to learn them so that we can recognize any of these letters as we move on towards mastering the Arabic alphabet. Thank you. In this lecture we will be talking about a group of letters. These letters will be the letter Del, Zel, Ra, and Zay. Let's start with the letter Del, Del, which corresponds to the sound of the letter D in English. This is a very simple letter in terms of its shape because it can only take two shapes: the initial shape, or when it is separate, and the medial and the final shape when it is connected to a letter before it. So we can see this when it is in a word like دائرة, دائرة, which means circle. You'll find that the letter dal occurs in the beginning of the word, and so it takes the initial form. When we look into another word like مدير, مدير, which means manager, you'll find that the dal occurs in the middle of the word and it's connected to the letter before it, so it takes this medial or final form. Moving on to the letter ذال, ذال, which corresponds to the sound that we have in English for words like the, or this, or those. Its shape looks pretty similar to the letter dal, except that it has a dot on top of it, and it also has only two shapes: the initial or separate form and the medial or final form. We can see this in a word like the key, when the letter ذال occurs in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. However, when the letter ذال occurs in the middle or the end of the word, like in the word لذيذ, you'll find that it takes the medial or the final form for both instances of ذال here, لذيذ. Moving on to the letter ra, ra, which corresponds to the sound of the letter R in English, with some little bit of different pronunciation sometimes. And you can find that it also has very simple patterns here when it is in the beginning, or when it is in the beginning of the word, or it is separate, so it has this initial form, or when it is in the middle or the end of the word, so it takes this medial form, which shows that it is connected to a letter before it. So let's take an example for a word like rajul, rajul, which means man. You'll find that the letter ra takes the initial or separate form, while for the word like kareem, kareem, which means generous, you'll find that the ra is connected to the letter before it, which is kaf, and so it takes the medial or final form. And this particular word kareem is important because it means generous, and it's a name of many people. And sometimes when there are people greeting each other for Ramadan, for the month of Ramadan, they say Ramadan Kareem, which means Ramadan is generous. Moving on to the letter zay, zay, which is sometimes referred to as zain, zain. It corresponds to the sound z in English, which comes from the letter z or z, and it also appears very similar to the letter ra, except that it has a dot on top of it, and it also has only two shapes: in the beginning of the word or separate, and when it is in the middle or the end of the word and connected to a letter before it. We can see this in the word like zaytun, zaytun, which means olives, and here you find that the letter zay occurs in the beginning of the word and it takes the initial form, while for the word like nizaa, nizaa, it occurs in the middle of the word and is connected to the letter before it, which is noon, and then we'll find that it takes the medial or final shape or form of the letter. Now we have discussed the letters dal, dhal, ra, and zay, so we will be able to recognize them whenever we see them in any word in Arabic. Let's do the quiz and make sure that we can identify these letters very well. Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we will be talking about a group of letters, the letters sin and sheen, sad, and dad. The letter sin is very similar to the sound S for the letter S in English, and it takes a number of shapes. If it is separate, it looks like this. This is the standard shape of it. it looks more like a W and then like a big arc. And when it is in the beginning, it looks like this. So this is the initial form of it, and also has the same appearance of a W. And this is the medial form of it when it comes in the middle of the word, and this is the final form of it. So let's take examples. In the word Sa'id, Sa'id, which means happy, you'll find that the letter Sin occurs in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. And in the word Asal, Asal, which means honey, you'll find that the letter Sin occurs in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. And in the word like Ams, Ams, which means yesterday, you'll find that the letter Sin occurs at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Moving on to the letter Sheen, Sheen, which corresponds to the sound sh, like in the word she or should in English, you'll find that it follows a very similar pattern in terms of shape to the letter Sin that we have seen before, except that it has these 3 dots. These 3 dots is something that we've seen in a previous letter. Can you remember which one it was? Exactly, it was the letter The, The. So this letter takes also a separate form, initial form, medial form, and final form. For example, in the word like shukran, shukran, which means thank you in Arabic, you'll find that the letter Sheen occurs in the beginning of the word, therefore it takes the initial form. When it comes in the middle of the word, like in the word mushkila, mushkila, which means problem, you'll find that it takes the medial form. When it comes at the end of the word, like in the word wahsh, wahsh, or monster or beast, you'll find that it takes the final form of the letter Sheen. Moving on to the letter Sod, Sod, you'll find that it is similar to the sound S, although it's more emphatic. It's actually one of those emphatic letters in Arabic which are harder to pronounce by non-native speakers. So this one has also a separate form, an initial form, medial form, and final form. Let's take, for example, the word Sadiq, Sadiq, which means friend. You'll find that the letter Sad occurs in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. And for the word Basal, Basal, which means onion, you'll find that the letter Sad occurs in the middle, so it takes the shape of the medial form. And if it occurs at the end of the word, like in the word shakhs, shakhs, which means person, you'll find that it takes the final form. Moving on to the letter Dad, Dad, which is also an emphatic form of the sound D, D, that we have seen in the letter Dal before, and corresponds to the it corresponds roughly to the sound D of the letter D in English. It's also one of the very emphatic letters and sounds of Arabic which are harder to pronounce. Actually, this particular letter Dad is a very characteristic of the Arabic language among its speakers, because it is the Arabic language itself is referred to at sometimes as the language of Dad, لغة الضاد. So you also find that it follows very similar patterns that we have seen for the letter Sad, except that it has a dot on top of it. And so this is the separate form of the letter Dad, and this is the initial form, this is the medial form, and this is the final form. So let's take a word like Daw, ضوء, which means light, you'll find that the letter ضاد comes in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. While in the word فضاء, فضاء, which means space, you'll find that the letter ضاد occurs in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. While for the word like بيض, بيض, which means eggs, you'll find that the letter ضاد occurs at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. In this lecture, we have seen 4 different letters: letter sin, shin, صاد, and ضاد, and we have seen their different shapes and sounds, and now we will be able to recognize them whenever we see them in any Arabic word. So let's do the quizzes and make sure we are very well aware of them to be able to recognize them whenever we see them. Thank you. Hello everyone and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we will be talking about a group of letters, the letters طاء and ظاء, عين and غين. The letter طاء corresponds to the sound ط, ط, which is one of the emphatic sounds that exist mainly in Arabic, but it is close to the sound t that we have seen in the letter t before, which is closer to the t sound in the t letter in English. And this letter has a number of different shapes. This is how it looks like when it is separate, and this is the initial form of it when it comes in the beginning of the word, which is very similar, and this is the medial form when it comes in the middle of the word, and this is the final form which when it comes at the end of the word. Let's take for example the word طريق, طريق, which means road. Here you'll find that the letter طاء occurs in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. Moving on to the word بطل, بطل, which means hero, you'll find that the letter طاء occurs in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. For the word فقط, فقط, which means only, you'll find that the letter طاء occurs at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Moving on to the letter ظاء, ظاء, it's also one of these letters with these emphatic sounds. So this one is related to both the letter زاي that we've seen before and the letter ذال, which we also seen before. So it is similar to both of them, but we can't find it in English and many other languages. This letter follows the same patterns as the letter طاء that we have seen before, except that it has a dot on top of it. It has this shape when it is separate, and it has this shape when it's in the initial form, and this is when it has in the middle form. It has this shape as the separate form, and this one is in the when it's in the beginning, so this is the initial form, and this is the medial form when it's in the middle, and this is the final form when it's in the end of the word. Let's take for example the word ظريف, ظريف, which means funny. You'll find that the letter ظاء, ظاء, occurs in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. While for the word like عظيم, عظيم, you'll find that the letter ظاء occurs in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. While for the word like حظ, حظ, which means luck, you'll find that it occurs at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Moving on to the letter عين, عين, which is also one of the letters that are quite hard to pronounce for non-native speakers, and therefore we don't have an English equivalent for it, and this is why we use the number 3 to reflect this sound whenever we have it in any word as part of the transcription system for this course. So this is the letter عين, عين. It also takes a number of different shapes, This is how it looks like when it is separate, and this is when it comes in the beginning of the word. So this is the initial form, and this is the medial form. This is when it comes in the middle of the word, and this is the final form when it comes at the end of the word. Notice that the medial and final forms have some little bit of difference between the initial and separate form, so we need to pay attention to this. Let's take some examples. For a word like ayn, which is, interestingly enough, it means eye. So the name of the letter is ayn, and this word means ayn, which means eye. And in this word, the letter ayn is in the beginning of it, so it takes the initial form. And in a word like ma'lumat, which means information, you'll find that the letter ayn is in the middle, so it takes this medial shape. While for a word like wasi'a, which means wide, you'll find that the letter ayn comes at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Moving on to the letter ghayn, which is also one of the letters that do not have a sound that exists in English, but it exists in some other languages like French and German when speakers are trying to pronounce the R sound. So let's try to see how it looks like. So ghayn looks like this when it is separate, and it follows the same patterns of ayn that we've seen before. So this is the initial form, this is the medial form, and this is the final form. Here we can repeat the observation that we've made about the medial and final forms of ghayn, which have some differences between the initial and separate forms of the letter. So let's take examples here. For example, for the word like ghani, which means rich, you'll find that the letter ghayn occurs in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. While for the word like lugha, which means language, you'll find that the letter ghayn occurs in the middle, so it takes the medial form. And here we have the word samgh, which means glue, and you'll find that the letter ghayn occurs at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. In this lecture, we have seen 4 new letters: the letter ta, and dha, and ayn, and ghayn. We have seen their different shapes, and we've learned their sounds and their names, and now we will be able to identify them whenever we see them in any word in Arabic. So make sure to do the quizzes and learn these letters very carefully so that we'll be able to recognize them in any Arabic word as part of our mastery of the Arabic alphabet. See you next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture today. In this lecture, we'll be talking about 4 new letters: the letter fa, the letter qaf, the letter kaf, and the letter lam. The letter fa corresponds to the sound f, like the letter F in English, and it has different forms. This is how it looks like when it is separate, and this is the initial form, this is the medial form, and this is the final form. Notice that the medial form might be little similar to the one that we've seen for the letter ghayn here, but you can see the difference because fa has a clear circle, whether it's in the beginning form or in the medial or in the initial or in the final. And it also has a dot. So these are the different forms of the letter fa. This is when it is separate, and this is the initial form, this is the medial form, this is the final form. Notice that the medial form might be similar to the medial form of the letter ghayn, except that this medial form for the letter fa has a clear circle, which is the same case for all other forms. Let's take, for example, the word fariq. which means team in Arabic, and we'll find that the letter fa occurs in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. Let's take the word safina, safina, which means ship. We'll find that the letter fa is in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. And we also have the word unf, unf, which means violence, and you'll find that the letter fa occurs at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Moving on to the letter qaf, which is one of these letters with the emphatic sounds that we see in Arabic, and this will be and this letter is quite close to the letter kaf that we'll see in a little bit, and the closest sound in English that we have for this letter is the K sound. So sometimes we use as K or Q to indicate the sound of words containing this letter. This letter has different shapes, so this is the shape that the letter takes when it is separate, and this is the shape for the initial form, and this is the medial form, and this is the final form. So for example, for the word like qarib, qarib, which means near or a relative, you'll find that the letter qaf takes the initial form, while for the word like nuqta, nuqta, which means point or dot, you'll find that the letter qaf takes the medial form. And for a word like dayiq, dayiq, which means narrow or tight, you'll find that the letter qaf takes the final form. Moving on to the letter kaf, kaf, which is similar to the sound of K in English. This letter also takes a number of different forms, so this is the form it takes when it is separate, and this is the initial form, this is the medial form, and this is the final form. So let's take the word like kasul, kasul, which means lazy. You'll find that it has the letter kaf in the beginning, so it takes the initial form. While for the word like maktab, maktab, which means office or desk, you'll find that the letter kaf comes in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. And here we'll find that the word samak, samak, which means fish, you'll find that the letter kaf comes at the end of the word, so it takes this final form. Moving on to the letter lam, lam, which roughly corresponds to the sound of the letter L in English, you'll find that it takes a number of different shapes. So this is the shape it takes when it's separate, and this is the initial form, this is the medial form, and this is the final form. Let's take, for example, a word like lu'ba, lu'ba, which means toy or game, and you'll find that the letter lam comes in the beginning of the word, so it takes the initial form. While for a word like milh, milh, which means salt, you'll find that the letter lam comes in the middle of the word, so it takes the medial form. And you have a word like amal, amal, which means work, and you'll find that the lam comes at the end of the word, so it takes the final form. Notice that this can be a little confusing to the letter alif that we have seen at the very first lecture, but the important distinction is that lam, when it comes in the middle, it is connected to both the letter before it and after it, which doesn't occur for alif. So in this lecture we have seen 4 new letters: the letter fa, qaf, kaf, and lam. We have seen their different shapes, we knew their sounds and their names, and so we will be able to recognize them in any Arabic word that we see. So let's do the quizzes and try to learn how to recognize these letters in any context, and this will serve us very well in our journey to master the Arabic alphabet. Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of this course. In the first part, we have learned the Arabic alphabet. We have learned all the letters and their names and their sounds, in addition to their different shapes. And now we are able to recognize any letter in any word in Arabic. However, this is not everything that is needed for reading Arabic. Let's take an example here. Here is a word called akala, akala, which means he ate in Arabic, and there is another word called akl, akl, which means food. Both of these words have the same letters, alif, kaf, lam, but the pronunciation is different. So what makes it different? The main difference here comes from what we know as the diacritics, or this short diacritic that occurs above the letter kaf, akala. And then we will look into the other word. We'll find there is another diacritic on top of the same, on the kaf sound in this letter, so it makes it akl, akl. So the diacritics indicate how the words are pronounced. Let's learn more about these. Diacritics are sometimes called harakat or tashkil in Arabic, and they mainly include short vowels which are not typically included among the letters. So these short vowels are the harakat or tashkil or diacritics that are applied at the words. So we can see that the first diacritic is called fatha, fatha, and it looks like a short inclined dash, and it is applied above the letter, and it gives that a short a sound. When you're adding the English transcription, you put an a after the letter. And then you have the diacritic called kasra, kasra, which looks like fatha, except that it goes under the letter and it gives the e sound. So it's more like a short e or I when you are adding English or Latin transcription. And then you have the dhamma diacritic, which, if you notice, it looks something like wow, the letter wow that we have studied in the alphabet, and it is indeed like a short wow. It's like oo sound, and it is applied above the letter. And then you have the sukoon, which looks like a circle, and in many cases it's not used, and it indicates that there is no vowel after the letter. It is important to indicate that most of the everyday writing in Arabic, these diacritics are not used because they are understood fairly easily between speakers, and they are mainly put either when a word is very ambiguous, or to avoid being misleading, or to the learners in the beginning who are not aware of the different rules of how to apply these diacritics in the words. So let's go back to them. Fatha, kasra, dhamma, sukoon. So these are the main diacritics indicating the vowels or absence thereof. And then we have another diacritic called shadda, which means duplication of a sound of a letter, and we actually find it in the same word shadda here, because when we see this symbol that looks like a W, it indicates that the sound of the letter is duplicated, and we see it in the transcription here, shadda, and we find that 2 D's here, shadda. And this diacritic can actually be combined with fatha and kasra and dhamma. So when it is combined with fatha, the letter is duplicated, the sound of the letter is duplicated, and it is followed by the a sound. When it is combined with kasra, we find that the kasra is no longer under the letter but just under the shadda, and the sound of the letter is duplicated, and there is a short E after it, and if it is combined with Dhamma, the sound of the letter is duplicated and has the U sound after it. We will go through examples of each of these diacritics and their combinations, and we'll see how they work in actual words. Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture about applying diacritics to different letters of the alphabet. Let's start with the letter Alif, the first letter of the alphabet. So we can see that the letter Alif can have a fatha above it, so it will give us the a sound, like Asad, Asad, the word lion. And we can have it with a kasra, and also the hamza in this case would be under it, so it will be like E, like in the word ibra, ibra, which means needle. And it can be combined with the Dhamma diacritic to make it like U sound. So for a word like Ustad, which means teacher or mister. And you can have it also with sukoon, so it will not have a vowel after it. For example, in a word like ra'i, which means opinion. Now let's go to the letter ba. So this letter, you can find that we can apply the fatha and kasra and dhamma and sukoon and shadda, and we'll see all of this. So it can have, when we combine it with fatha, it will be ba, like balad. The word balad means country. And you can also combine it with kasra in bi, bint, the word bint, which means girl. Or you combine it with dhamma to be bu, like the word burj, which means tower, as in Burj Khalifa. You may know about it. And you can have it with sukoon, so it will be qabl, like before. And you can have it with shadda, and in this case it's shadda combined with fatha, so you can have it in a word like sabbar, which means cactus. Moving on to the next letter, which is ta, you can find the same combinations. So we can have it with fatha, be ta, like the word tarjama, which means translation. And you can have it with kasra, be like tikrar, which means repetition. And you can have it with dhamma, tu, like tuffah, which means apples. And you can have it with sukoon, be qatl, which means murder. And you can have it combined, we can have it with shadda, and also can be combined with other diacritics. So in this case we can have it in a word like fattaha, like an opener, like a can opener. Moving on to the letter tha, we find it when it's combined with fatha, it will be tha, like the word thalj, which means ice or snow. And you can have it with kasra, be thi, like the word thiqa, which means confidence. Or you combine it with dhamma, so it will be thu, like thu'ban, which means snake. And you can have it with sukoon in a word like mithl, which means such as or for example. And you can have it also with shadda, so it will be something like mathal, which means a sculptor. And for the letter Jim, you will find that it can also, all of the same patterns apply. So when you add fatha, it will be ja, ja, like the word jaish, jaish, which means army. And you add kasra, so it will be ji, ji, like jiran, jiran, which means neighbors. Or you can add dhamma, so it will be like ju, ju, like juzur, juzur, which means islands. Or you can have it with sukoon, so it will be like sijn, sijn, which means prison. And you can have it with shadda, so it will be like in a word like sajjan, sajjan, which means the warden of the prison. Moving on to the letter ha, let's apply also the diacritics here. When we have fatha, it sounds like ha, ha, like harf, harf, which means letter in Arabic. And when it has kasra, it sounds like hi, hi, for a word like himaya, himaya, which means protection in Arabic. When we have it with dhamma, it sounds like hu, hu, which, for example, in a word like hub, hub, which means love in Arabic. And you can also have it with sukoon for a word like tahrir, tahrir, which means liberation, which you may know about the famous Tahrir Square in Egypt. And you can have it also with shadda for a word like nahal, nahal, or the beekeeper. Moving on to the letter kha, kha, let's apply the diacritics to it. So when kha comes with fatha, it sounds as kha, kha, as in the word kharoof, kharoof, which means sheep in Arabic. When we add kasra to it, it sounds something like khi, khi. For example, a word like khibra, khibra, which means experience or expertise in Arabic. And you can add, and you can also apply dhamma to it, so it'd be like khu, khu, like khutta, khutta, which means a plan in Arabic. And then we can have also sukoon with kha in a word like akhbar, akhbar, or the news. Then we can also have shadda with kha, and in this case we find it shadda with kasra, so in a word like mudakhin, mudakhin, which means smoker, someone who smokes cigarettes. That's it for this lecture. In the next lectures we will continue with the next letters of the alphabet with the diacritics applied to them. Thank you. Hello everyone, and let's continue with the diacritics together with the letters of the alphabet. Now we will talk about the letter dal. So when it has fatha, it will be da, da, like in the word dam, dam, which means blood. And when it has kasra, it sounds as di, di, like in the word difa', difa', which means defense. And when it has dhamma, it will be like du, du, like in the word dunya, dunya, which means world in Arabic. So you can have it with sukoon in a word like madrasa, madrasa, which means school in Arabic. And you can have it with shadda for a word like mudda, mudda, which means period in Arabic. And then let's talk about the letter dhal, dhal, and the diacritics. So when we have dhal with fatha, to be the, like the word dhaki, dhaki, which means intelligent or smart in Arabic. When we have dhal with kasra, it becomes the, like the word dhira', dhira', or arm. And when it has dhamma, it becomes something like dhu, like the word dhubaba, dhubaba, which means fly in Arabic. And you can also have it with sukoon for a word like udhr, udhr, or an excuse. And you can have it with shadda for a word like kadhab, كذاب or liar in Arabic. And moving on to the letter Ra, you can find it with fatha, it will be like Ra, Ra, in a word like Rad, Rad, which means response in Arabic. And we have it with kasra, so it will be Ri, Ri, like the word Riyada, Riyada, which means sport in Arabic. And you can have it with Dhamma, so it will be Ru, Ru, like the word Rubbama, Rubbama in Arabic, which means perhaps or maybe. And you can have it with Sukoon, so it will be in a word like Qarn, Qarn, which means either a horn or a century. And you can have it with Shadda, so it will be in a word like Marra, Marra, which means once. Moving on to the letter Zay, Zay, you will find the letter Zay with fatha sounds something like Z, Z, like the word Zarafa, Zarafa, which means giraffe in Arabic. And when the letter Zay has kasra, it sounds as Z, Z, like the word Zir, Zir, which means button in Arabic. And when we have Dhamma, it becomes Zu, Zu, like the word Zubd in Arabic, which means butter. And you can also have it with Sukoon, for example, a word like Wazn, Wazn, which means weight in Arabic. And you can have it with Shadda for a word like Iwazza, Iwazza, which means goose in Arabic. Moving on to the letter Sin, let's see how the diacritics work with it. So the letter Sin with fatha becomes Sa, Sa, like the word Sad, Sad, or dam in Arabic. And Sin with kasra becomes Si, Si, like the word Sir, Sir in Arabic, which means secret. And with Dhamma it becomes Su, Su, like the word Sum, Sum in Arabic, which means poison. And when it has Sukoon, you can find it in a word like Muslim, Muslim. And you can also find it with Shadda in a word like Khas, Khas, which means lettuce in Arabic. Moving on to the letter Sheen, Sheen, let's see how the diacritics work with it. When we have Sheen with fatha, it becomes Sha, Sha, like the word Shahr, Shahr, which means month in Arabic. And you can have it with kasra, so it becomes Shi, Shi, like Shihada, Shihada, which means certificate or testimony in Arabic. And you can have it with Dhamma, so it will be Shu, Shu, like the word Shukran, Shukran in Arabic, which means thanks. And you can have it with Sukoon, so it will be Mushkila, Mushkila, the word problem in Arabic. And you can also have it with Shadda, like in a word like Qash, Qash, which means hay in Arabic. And moving on to the letter Sad, Sad, you'll find that when it comes with fatha, it becomes Sa, Sa, like the word Samt, Samt, or silence. When it has kasra, it becomes Si, Si, like the word Sirafa, Sirafa, or money exchange. When it has Dhamma, it becomes Su, Su, like the word Su'uba, Su'uba, or difficulty. And you can have it with Sukoon in a word like Asl, Asl, or which means origin in Arabic. And you can have it with Shadda in a word such as Lis, Lis, which means thief in Arabic. Moving on to the letter Dad, Dad, we see that Dad with fatha is Da, Da, like the word ضريبة, ضريبة, which means tax, and with kasra it becomes ضي, ضي, like the word ضيافة, ضيافة, or hospitality. And when it has dhamma it becomes ضو, ضو, like ضفدع, ضفدع, which means frog. And it can also have sukoon in a word like hadm, hadm, which means digestion. It can also have shadda in a word like fidda, fidda, which means silver. So this is it for this lecture. We will continue with the rest of the letters in the remaining lectures. Thank you so much. Hello everyone and welcome to this lecture. We will continue with the letters of the alphabet together with the diacritics. We will be starting with the letter ta, ta. When it has fatha, it sounds ta, ta, like the word tariq, tariq, which means road in Arabic. When it has kasra, it sounds as ti, ti, like the word tiba'a, tiba'a, which means printing in Arabic. When it has dhamma, it sounds tu, tu, like the word turuq, turuq, which means roads in Arabic. It can also have sukoon, like the word qutn, qutn, or cotton in Arabic. And it can also come with shadda, like the word batta, batta, which means duck in Arabic. Moving on to the letter dha, dha, we can see that with fatha it sounds as dha, dha, like the word dharif, dharif, which means funny. And with kasra it sounds dhi, dhi, like the word dhil, dhil, which means shadow. And with dhamma it sounds dhu, dhu, like the word dhulm, dhulm, which means injustice. And it can also come with sukoon in a word like hadr, hadr, which means prohibition. And it can come with shadda in a word like hadh, hadh, which means luck. Moving on to the letter ayn, ayn. When it has fatha, it sounds a, like the word adi, adi, which means normal. When it has kasra, it sounds as like the word ilaqa, ilaqa, which means relationship. When it has dhamma, it sounds like the word unf, unf, which means violence. When it has sukoon, you can find it in a word like ba'd, ba'd, which means after. When it has shadda, you can find it in a word like fa'al, fa'al, which means effective. Moving on to the letter ghayn, ghayn, you can find it with fatha to sound like gha, gha, like in the word gharib, gharib, which means strange. And with kasra it sounds like ghi, ghi, like the word ghish, ghish, which means cheating. And with dhamma it sounds ghu, ghu, like the word ghusn, ghusn, which means branch. And with sukoon in a word like maghrur, maghrur, which means arrogant. And with shadda you can find in a word like musaghar, musaghar, which means miniature. And for the letter fa, fa, when it has fatha it sounds as fa, fa, like the word fan, fan, which means art in Arabic. And with kasra it sounds as fi, fi, like the word fikra, fikra, which means idea in Arabic. And with dhamma you can find a word like fustan, fustan, which means dress in Arabic. And you can also have it with sukoon in a word like qifl, qifl, which is a lock in Arabic. And it can have also shadda in a word like شفاف, شفاف, or transparent. Moving on to the letter qaf, qaf, you can find it with fatha to sound like qa, qa, in a word like qarib, qarib, which means near, and with kasra it will sound like qi, qi, like in the word qird, qird, which means monkey. And you can also have it with dhamma to sound like qu, qu, like in the word qubla, qubla, which means kiss in Arabic. And it can also come with sukoon in a word like aql, aql, which means brain. And it can come with shadda in a word like muaqqad, muaqqad, which means complicated. So today we have covered a number of letters, showing how the diacritics apply to them. We will continue with the rest in the coming lectures. Thank you. Hello everyone and welcome to this lecture. We will continue with the remaining letters of the alphabet together with the application of the diacritics. Right now we added the letter kaf. With fatha it sounds as ka, ka, like the word kareem, kareem, which means generous. And with kasra it sounds as ki, ki, like the word kitaba, kitaba, which means writing. With dhamma it sounds as ku, ku, like the word koob, koob, which means cup or glass in Arabic. And it can also come with sukoon, so you can find it in a word like maktab, maktab, which means office or desk. And it can come with shadda, so you can find a word like sukkar, sukkar, or sugar in Arabic. The next letter is lam, and with fatha it sounds as la, la, like the word laban, laban, or milk in Arabic. With kasra it sounds as li, li, like the word lisan, lisan, which means tongue in Arabic. And with dhamma it sounds as lu, lu, like the word lu'ba, lu'ba, which means game or toy in Arabic. And with sukoon you can find in a word like mal'ab, mal'ab, which means playground or kind of a stadium. And with shadda you can find in a word like mumil, mumil, which means boring. Moving on to the letter mim, mim, we can find it with different diacritics. So with fatha it sounds as ma, ma, like the word marid, marid, which means sick. And with kasra it sounds as mi, mi, like the word mir'ah, mir'ah, or mirror in Arabic. And with dhamma it sounds as mu, mu, like the word munasib, munasib, which means suitable in Arabic. And it can come with sukoon in a word like amn, amn, which means security. And it can come with shadda in a word like muhim, muhim, which means important. Moving on to the letter noon, we can find it with different diacritics. For fatha it sounds as na, na, like the word nasiha, nasiha, which means advice. With kasra it sounds as ni, ni, like the word nisyan, nisyan, which means forgetting. And with dhamma it sounds as nu, nu, like the word nuqud, nuqud, which means money. And with sukoon you can find in a word like anta, anta, which means you in Arabic. For shadda you can find in a word like banna, banna, like a builder, or an adjective means constructive. And for the letter ha, you can find it with different diacritics. With fatha, it sounds as ha, ha, like the word hadi, hadi, or calm. With kasra, it sounds as he, like in the word hiya, hiya, which means she. With dhamma, it sounds as hu, like the word huna, huna, which means here. And with sukoon, you can find it in a word like sahl, sahl, which means easy. And with shadda, you can find in a word like mu'ahil, mu'ahil, which means qualification. And for the letter waw, with fatha, it sounds as wa, like in the word warda, warda, which means flower. And with kasra, it sounds as we, like the word wikala, which means agency. And with dhamma, it sounds as wu, like the word wusul, which means arrival. And with sukoon, you can find a word like mawrid, which means resource. And for shadda, you can find a word like quwwa, which means strength. Moving on to the letter ya, which is the last letter of the alphabet, you can find it with fatha to sound like ya, like the word yad, which means hand. And with kasra, you can find in the to sound like ye, like the word yen, which is the Japanese currency. And with dhamma, it sounds as you, like the word yusr, which means ease. And it can come also with sukoon for a word like saif, which means sword. And it can come with shadda for a word like sayyid, which means master. So that's it. We have finished this part about Arabic diacritics, and now we can identify all the diacritics that we can see applied to any letter in Arabic. So using the diacritics together with what we have learned about the letters of the alphabet and their sounds and different shapes, we will be able to sound out any word in Arabic. Thank you so much. Please make sure to do the quizzes and any additional material for practicing what you have learned. Thank you. We have covered all the diacritics and their combinations with all the letters of the alphabet, which would allow you to pronounce any letter in the alphabet if you know the diacritic that is applied to it. However, before we end this part about diacritics, it's important to note an important diacritic that you can find it in many words. So this is known as tanween, which is a special diacritic that comes at the end of some words, mainly for grammatical reasons. It gives the sound of noon at the end. For example, you find the word asad, which means lion in Arabic, and when you apply tanween to it, there are three possibilities. Tanween with dhamma, which gives you the sound un, like asadun, and with fatha, and it gives you the sound asadan, and with kasra, it gives you the sound asadin. So it gives the same sound of kasra or fatha or dhamma, but with an additional noon sound. And you can find it depends mainly on the grammatical status of the word. For example, you can say هذا كلب, which in this case the word kalb is in subject or a similar position, so it takes the tanween with dhamma. And I can say وجدت كلبا, which means I found a dog, and because it is in the object position, it takes the tanween with fatha. And when we say لعبت مع كلب, which means I played with a dog, so if dog is in the after the preposition, it takes tanween with kasra. The important thing is to know that when you find any of these diacritics, you know how they sound. And it's very important to know the diacritics because many of the very frequently used expressions have tanween in them. For example, the word shukran, which means thanks, has tanween. And also the word afwan, which means you are welcome. And also the word hasanan, which means okay. And the word qariban, which means soon. And the word ahlan, which means hello. And the word marhaban, which means welcome. All of these words have tanween in them, and we just need to notice when we see the tanween sign and we have like an alif at the end with tanween, then we know that there is the N sound at the end. And one little important information is that when you have ta' marbuta and a tanween is applied to it, you'll find that the ta' marbuta is converted to normal ta'. For example, the word batta, which means duck, when it has tanween with dhamma, it is pronounced as battatun. When it has tanween with fatha, it is pronounced as battatan. And when it has tanween with kasra, it sounds as battatin. So that's it about tanween, which is important to know when you are reading Arabic, to know how to pronounce this particular diacritic. Before we conclude this course, let's talk about a few prefixes and suffixes which are very common, which will help you a lot when you are reading Arabic words. The first one is the alif lam or al, and this is basically like the article the in English. It makes nouns definite, so you add it to indefinite nouns and adjectives so that you make them definite. For example, the word kalb, which means dog, if you add alif lam to it, it becomes al-kalb, and in this case it means the dog. And you notice that it can also be applied to adjectives. You can say that kalb kabir, which means a big dog, but when you add alif lam before the word and the adjective, before the noun and the adjective, it becomes al-kalb al-kabir, the big dog. Another very important letter that comes before words is the letter waw, which means and. So you can find it between words to mean something and something. When you want to say a dog and a camel, you can say that kalb wa jamal. So you find the waw between the two words before the second word. It also applies when you have alif lam in the words. For example, you can say that al-kalb wal-jamal, the dog and the camel. Also, a very important suffix is the ta' marbuta, which we talked about in the alphabet, but we also need to know that when you apply it to certain words, it makes the feminine version of it. For example, you can say mudarris, which means teacher, but when you add ta' marbuta to it, you can say mudarrisa, which means a teacher, but a female teacher. So when you have this ta' marbuta, you can know that in many cases it means the feminine version of the word. And it also applies for adjectives. For example, the adjective kareem, which means generous. When you add ta' marbuta to it, it becomes karima, which means generous when you are describing a female person. Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture. This lecture is a culmination of everything that we have been working on since the beginning of this course. It's basically using our knowledge about the alphabet and the diacritics to actually sounding out any Arabic word that we see. So let's see how this works. Here we have a word in Arabic. We don't know what it is. So let's start step by step. The first step is actually to break it down into the different letters it consists of together with the diacritics. And here we see it has these letters. So let's go through them, and that we know we go from right to left. So this one first, and this one, and then this one, and then this one. So let's see. So the first one is this letter. What is it? This is Jim. Jim. And it comes with Dhamma. So what sound does it make? Ju. Ju. Very good. Then what is the second letter? It's Mim. Mim. And what diacritic is this? It's Sukun. So it sounds as without any vowel after it. And the next one is letter Lam. Lam. And what diacritic is this? It's Fatha. Fatha. So what sound does it make? Le. Le. And this is the last letter of this word, which is Ta marbuta. Ta marbuta. So it sounds as h sound. So let's put it all together. So it is Jumla. 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 So this word means Jumla, which means sentence in Arabic. Very good. Let's continue with other examples. Here is another word that we don't know. So let's break it down into the individual letters. These are the letters it consists of. So let's go through them one by one. The first one is the letter Mim. Mim with Fatha. So it sounds as Ma. Ma. And the second one is Ain. Ain with Sukun. So it sounds as A. A. Without any vowel after it. And then we have Noon with Fatha. So it sounds as Na. Na. And then we have this letter, which we know from the first lecture. It's called Alif Layyina. Alif Layyina. So it has the same sound as the sound. So it has the same sound as the letter Alif, which is A. A. Now putting it all together, it is Ma'na. 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 Which means actually meaning in Arabic. Ma'na. Very good. Let's continue. Now let's look into this word. And let's break it down into the individual letters. Notice here something, that this shape that we have learned in the first lecture, it's called Lam Alif. Lam Alif. So when we break it down, we break it into Lam and Alif. And then we can see all the letters that this word consists of. So let's start with the first one. It's Ain. Ain with Kasra. So it sounds as I. I. And then we have Lam with Fatha. So it sounds as La. La. And then we have Alif, which is without Hamza. It's in the middle of the word, so it sounds as A. A. And then we have Qaf with Fatha. So it sounds as Qa. Qa. And then we have Ta marbuta, which sounds as H. H. Then putting it all together. علاقة. 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 علاقة, which means relationship in Arabic. This is a more complicated word. So let's break it down into individual letters. Notice here that the first two letters are alif lam, which we have discussed in the prefixes lecture, and these can be easily recognized in many words. Let's start by the first one, which is alif, and we know it's a, and then lam, which is l. So this is the alif lam part of the word. And then we have the letter ayn with fatha, so it sounds as a. And then we have ra with fatha, so it sounds as ra. And then we have ba with kasra, so it sounds as bi. And then we have ya with shadda and fatha, so it sounds as ya, ya. And then we have ta marbuta, which sounds as h. So now we can put it all together. Al-Arabiyyah, 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 which means the Arabic language. So now you can recognize the name of the Arabic language whenever you see it written anywhere. Al-Arabiyyah. Let's take this word and break it down into individual letters. What is the first letter here? It's the letter mim with dhamma, so it sounds as mu, mu. And then the second letter is also mim, but in this case it's with sukoon, so it's just without any vowel after it. And then the next letter is ta, ta with fatha, so it sounds as ta, ta. And then we have the letter alif in the middle, so it sounds as a. And the final letter is zay, so it sounds as z. Now let's put it all together. Mumtaz, 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 which means excellent in Arabic. And this is excellent. You've done excellent work in this course. There is another point that we need to also work on before we finish, which is in many cases we don't have the diacritics to guide us into the exact pronunciation of the word, but we still can manage. Let's take this word for example, which does not have diacritics. What can we do with it? Let's first break it down into letters as we did before. So these are the letters that this word consists of, and this is the first letter, which is jim, which sounds as j, j. And then the next letter is waw, which sounds as wu, wu. And then the third letter is ra, ra, which sounds as r, r. And the last is also jim, so it sounds again as j, j. Let's put it all together. It will be like George, George, George. So this is actually the name George in English, and you are able to sound it out using only the letters. This can be the case for many non-Arabic names, that you can sound it out just with the letters. And let's take this word and break it down into letters. So the first letter is the letter kaf, which sounds as k, k. And the second is waw, which sounds as wu, wu. And the third is ra, which sounds as r, r. And the fourth is ya, which sounds as y, y. And the last letter is alif, which sounds as a, a. Let's put it all together, so you'll find it Korea, Korea, Korea. So this is actually how you write Korea in Arabic. Moving on to another word, let's try to break it down into the individual letters. And then let's start with the first one, which is del, which sounds as d, d. The second one is ye, which sounds as y, y. Third is sin, which sounds as s, s. The next one is mim, which sounds as m, m. And the following one is be, which sounds as b, b. And the last one is ra, which sounds as r, r. Putting it all together, it will be December, December, December. So this is actually the month December, and now we are able to recognize it when we see it in Arabic. So this is the end of this lecture, and I hope this will actually allow you to put together everything that you have learned from this course, and now you can practice as much as possible with every Arabic word that you see, and you'll be able to sound it out, and you can start to actually have the first step in actually reading Arabic writing. Thank you so much. As we're concluding this course, I'd like to thank you so much for being part of it. I really enjoyed teaching it, and I hope you'll find it useful in your journey to learn Arabic. The aim of this course is to be a practical way for you to get started with reading Arabic by not just providing lists of letters and expect the learners to fill in the missing pieces, but to actually go step by step into the process. And with our Champollion approach, I hope it was possible to highlight the elements to be learned and acquire them step by step, gradually building the skill of recognizing and sounding elements of Arabic writing. However, this is only the first step into reading Arabic. In further courses, we will introduce other topics related to pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, conversation, and others. So, stay tuned with further announcements, and looking forward to having you in the coming courses. Thank you.